Hi everybody, I'm Bea Marshall, founder of Yes Parenting. I'm being joined today by Rebecca Kane. She is a Cauldron Priestess, and I'm really excited to be interviewing her today ahead of her time in my subscription group, which is called Yes Parenting for Happy Families. And she is coming in as a guest expert to talk all about working with the energies of the moon and what it means to have an internal moon cycle. And I'm really excited. So Rebecca, welcome to...
Thanks, Bea.
Rebecca and I have never met well, not that we're meeting directly in person, but before this interview, we hadn't ever met face to face. But I've been involved in Rebecca's Facebook group, which is called Moon Musings.
Magical Moon Musings,
Magical Moon Musings. And I've been involved in that group for several months now. And I dip in and out, but what's brilliant about that group is Rebecca ensures that every single day a post comes up that shares what day the moon cycle is at, and how you might experience the energies of the moon on that day, and what that might mean for how you put that into practice. And so that really supported me to begin exploring this connection with the moon that I was aware of, but I had no idea where to get started with. And so to be able to invite Rebecca into my subscription group and receive her wisdom for a week is super exciting. So before I really kind of open the interview fully, I just want to share a bit of Rebecca's bio with you, so you know a bit about her, and then we're going to chat all about it. So Rebecca Kane guides women on their SHEro's journey throughout life. And I've already let Rebecca know, I'm going to ask her what this means. What is this SHEro's journey? She's a mystic healer and a Cauldron Priestess. And for the past 17 years, she's been working with women who feel out of sorts, not quite being able to put their finger on why they're not feeling truly happy when all the external things in their life feel right. One of the things I love about where Rebecca comes from is that she's about embracing your wholeness and not being perfect. So, and that's so aligned with where I come from as well. So she's working with women who've really lost touch with who they are and need to kind of remember that they need to come home to themselves, and embrace all of themselves, not just the pretty parts that they like to have on display. So I'm going to ask Rebecca first, can you tell us a bit more about how you came to call yourself a Cauldron Priestess, and kind of what do you understand by that? Because it sounds so powerful and so deeply kind of earthed, but it has this lovely kind of like mystical witchiness to it. So tell us about it.
I love that, mystical witch. That's probably me. That should be like my second title. So, oh my goodness, the whole Cauldron Priestess thing started quite a few years ago now, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but I came across training. I was just researching. I've never been a goddess person my whole life, you know. It's just like was never brought up like revering goddesses or being in like a feminist or like female spirituality. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I started getting a call from a Celtic goddess called Ceridwen. And when I say getting the call, it was things like I'd be reading a book and she'd be there. Nothing to the book, nothing to do with goddesses. So I thought, and her story would appear. I'd be researching something and she would appear again. And I think the final piece of the like, okay, I'm listening to the messages coming through it's my birthday in January. And at the end of February, I got sent a birthday present with a sorry it's late. Now this person doesn't particularly know me that well, and they had no idea what was going on with this whole like Ceridwen sneaking into my life. But she sent me a present from Lush. Okay, that sounds quite, normal, doesn't it? Yeah. But it was Ceridwen's Cauldron bath bomb. And I was like, okay, come on now. It's like, so for over a period of months, it's like Ceridwen was almost appearing every other day. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. interesting. And at the same time, I've just been doing a priestess training with Molly Reamer online. It was only, but I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 months. And I'm not even sure what drew me to it. It was one of those things where I just felt called to do this, and I got involved with red tent. Oh, that's how it happened. I started doing the red tents. I've built a red tent yurt in my garden to gather the women. And from there, I was like, oh, that's interesting to lead women. It was like led into the role of studying to be a priestess. And she asked one day about the idea of priestess as vocation or priestess as archetype. And it really resonated with me because, you know, I work very much with archetypal energy, and I believe that we can access any kind of archetype we want. And so, like, everybody has the ability to be a priestess to themselves. But for me, when she said vocation, it was like I had a remembering. And I've often heard people have that, like, kind of resonance for something in their life. And I've always been like, oh, I wish I could do that. That sounds really exciting. And then it happened to me, and I was like, holy mackerel. This is what people talk about when they have like a remembering of something that is so aligned. It's like visceral. And of course I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And then, you know, a couple of days later, I'm like, really? Can I claim that? I can't. That's too, who does that? You know, that feels too enormous, which is part of the SHEro's journey, which I'll talk about later. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I was researching Ceridwen, thinking she keeps coming up. Why is she coming up? First page, first ranking on Google, studying to be a Cauldron Priestess. Sorry, studying to be a priestess of Ceridwen. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because as much as I loved the online work, I really wanted to have an in-person experience. And because I feel you learn so much more from everybody in the class. So I signed up. I've never ever planned anything so far in advance. I signed up in February and the training didn't start until October. And that's not me. I don't do planning at all. And the whole Cauldron Priestess for me came from Ceridwen, because Ceridwen is the goddess of transformation, and whenever you see her, she's always with a cauldron. And for me, the cauldron represents us as women. It represents that womb space. It represents the ability that we can create anything. And as you said in my bio, it's about embracing all of us, not just the pretty parts. And it's like we put all of our experiences into our cauldron, the good, the bad, and the different. And we stir them around and we bring out something more wholesome, more magical than all the little disparate parts that went in. And it's like, I just love the energy of a cauldron. And of course some people are like, oh, it's witchy, but actually Ceridwen is a witch. She's a shaman. She's an earth goddess. You know, you said about Cauldron Priestess sounds very earthy. Absolutely. You know, I'm very much of the earth. My favorite place is to be in the woods. I love being outside. And so that's where the Cauldron Priestess came. It's like taking that darkness. It's like embracing the darkness, embracing that womanly intuition and that knowing that we have inside us as women, as mothers. When we can trust the darkness, the intuition, our life becomes much richer. And also, when you think about a cauldron, what were they used for? They were used to create food. You know, the soups are nourishing us, and stews. We do that with our families. You know, it's a place of nourishment for ourselves first, and then for our families too. So the whole idea of being a Cauldron Priestess, it's like claiming our magic, it's nourishing ourselves, it's having more to nourish to our families and our communities.
Wow.
So, yeah.
There's so much in that answer that I feel like I want to talk about that, I want to talk about that, I want to talk about that. So one of the things when you talked, you came back to that part in your bio that I read out about, you know, embracing all the parts of us, and the synchronicity of the way you brought that back in felt really significant, because last month in my subscription group we had a wonderful woman called Naomi Nigor, and she's a psychotherapist who works with internal family systems, which is about understanding all the different parts of you and how they're all trying to work for your highest good, even though that might on the surface look really messed up, but actually giving those parts an opportunity to talk to you and to be welcomed in and to explain, you know, why they're feeling this, why they're creating this behavior. And I love that we've had that one experience of understanding all these parts of us, which was very much about the idea that every part of us is valid, every part of us is worthy, and every part of us has something to bring to our well-being. And so it's wonderful that she's a psychotherapist. I mean, she is also very connected with the earth, and she's the woman who started the women's circle that I'm part of. So, you know, she has that rooted thing, but it's lovely that she's coming from a science perspective. And now you're coming to the group and you're coming from this like kind of really delicious kind of ancestral kind of heritage of what that means to be a woman and to embrace all of us and to bring all of our experiences in. And when you talked about the cauldron and you talked about the nurturing, and you said it's about nurturing ourselves first, and I was like, yes, because yes, parenting starts with responding to needs and then interests and preferences and then desires. And yes, it's all about responding to those things in that order with your kids, but it's first looking at, am I saying yes to my own needs? Am I saying yes to my own interests and preferences? Am I saying yes where possible to my desires? Because if we're not first looking at ourselves and giving ourselves what we need, then we don't have the resources to be who we need to be to our children, to our families, to our communities. And when you talked about the cauldron nurturing us first and then nurturing others, it felt the same. It felt like when we embody who we are and we embrace all those parts of ourselves, we begin that process of nurturing ourselves in order to nurture others. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
As women, we so often told that our role is to look after others first. It's to, you know, be the nurture, be the caregiver. And it's always like give. And I think in a world where we value doing and achieving, it's really difficult just to be. You know, I call it being and brewing because of course I would, because it's a cauldron energy. But, you know, it's like we ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. Women are absolutely intricately linked with that energy of ebb and flow. You watch the moon cycle, we go from dark to light and back to dark again. The days, we go from light to dark and back to light again. The seasons, we go from light to dark and back to light again. It's this constant flow of energy. And we sometimes forget that the pause, the rest is as important as the doing and the external expansion of energy. But in our world, what's really valued is the do. So we feel guilty, we feel ashamed that we need to stop, that we need to rest. We feel that it's superfluous. We just feel that it's, I shouldn't need to rest. And it's like actually it's the essential dance that we play with life. And when we don't, we become irritable, we become grouchy, we become resentful, we become angry. And then women get called high maintenance because their energies are up and down. But of course we are, because that's what our bodies are designed to do. That's why we can create the way that we do. It's why that we are so, our capacity for compassion, for love, for creating children if we wish, creating a home, creating poetry, creating art, whatever it is. We need to have that ebb and flow, but it's understanding how that works with us and understanding how we can use that as a superpower rather than something to feel guilty or ashamed about.
So you just mentioned superpower. So this is a wonderful moment for me to ask you to talk a little bit more about your passion. So you've shared with me that your passion is helping women to reconnect and reclaim their SHEro superpowers so that they can navigate their very own SHEro's journey with grace, ease, and joy. So I guess my question is two parts. One, tell us more a little bit about this concept of a SHEro.
Okay.
And two, what does that then mean to have SHEro superpowers and a SHEro's journey?
Great questions. Okay, so a SHEro is, as it would suggest, a female version of a hero. However, we are different from a traditional hero. When I grew up, particularly, child of the very late 70s, 80s, the books, the stories, the fairy tales, the myths, the films that I was on TV, the lead character was often a man. And that man, if you've ever heard of the work of Joseph Campbell, he coined the term the monomyth. And that monomyth you see in any fairy tale, the Greek classics, Star Wars. It was an essential, still is really an essential part of storytelling. So you'd have the man inevitably, or the young boy, that would be in his everyday surroundings, and then he'd have to go off on some wild adventure to save the princess, to save the village. And he would have to go on the adventure, and he would inevitably come up against a huge challenge or obstacle, slaying dragons, climbing mountains, win the woman, come home with her as a prize. Hallelujah, everyone's cheering for the hero. So women go on that same adventure. We have that call to action, but generally it's more of an internal call. So we still have the same phase, the same stages of the hero's journey, but where the woman has that call, it's like that intuitive call to do more, to do something that she knows she's here for something greater, that she wants to start that new class, that she wants to go traveling. But the next stage would be the challenge. So with the hero would be facing his dragons, he would be climbing mountains, he would be overcoming something significant. But for a woman, what we often have to overcome is our own beliefs, our own self-doubt, the expectations of society. So while we're not wielding a sword, we're still having to overcome a significant challenge. Then we have to have the transformation. And for transformation to happen, something usually has to die. Like in the film, you might, the man might lose his helper, or he might get like really badly injured, half die, and then miraculously come back to life, or you think you've killed the villain and then they suddenly come back and you've got another fight on your hands. Yeah. So it's the same for a woman. It's like we have to allow often part of ourself to die. And what I mean by that is like a belief system, a way of living. We have to let that old habit go. Maybe we have to release a friendship. So we're still going through that transformation so that then we can come back, and it's called the return home. So where the hero would come back victorious and everyone like bunting out, having a great party for him. For the woman, it's like embodying more of ourselves. It's understanding who we are at a deeper level and being able to more fully express who we are and be authentic in how we show up. And it's like, you're like, oh phew, that was an adventure. But with a woman, we follow a spiral path, and so we know that when we get back home, we get back to the beginning, there's going to be another call to adventure, there's going to be another intuitive hit that we get to follow, and we get to choose how far we go on this journey. But most women have that intuitive hit, they have that call, they have that gut feeling, they have that nagging voice that's talking to them in the middle of the night going, you should do this, you should start this course, you should have another child, you should leave your husband, you should marry that man, you should this is what you want with all of your body. And we can dream those things into being, and we're like, oh yeah, that would be amazing, and we can visualize it. And then comes the significant challenge. Then it gets hard. Then we have to do the work. We have to have the conversations. We have to leave the relationships. We have to start the relationships. And quite often that becomes quite difficult for people. So they go back to the call and then go through the full stages of the SHEro's journey. So they end up feeling frustrated because the call is very exciting. It's like full of possibilities. The significant challenge is full of realities. And if you don't know that that's just another part that you have to go through, it can feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to do it, it's too difficult. If I was supposed to do this, it would be easy.
Yes.
And absolutely, there is a way for what when things are right, because there is a feeling that goes with it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be plain sailing the whole way around. So the journey is just about accepting that wholeness, that whole cycle. And that SHEro's journey is something that women do every day. We can go through that journey every day. We can we definitely go through it every month through our own hormonal cycle. And if we don't have a hormonal cycle, we can chart with the moon. And whether you do or don't have a menstrual cycle, you also go through that SHEro's journey every month alongside the moon. And again, it's that ebb and flow of energy. And so each of those stages has their own challenges, but it also has their own superpowers too.
Okay, wow, amazing. So, I mean, I can see it in as you were talking, I can see it in my own life. I actually have a DVD that's all about Joseph Campbell's The Hero. I think the DVD is called The Hero's Journey. And I remember when I watched it, I felt really inspired by this thing, but I was like, aware that it was such masculine energy. And one of the things that I have been really wanting to explore within myself and develop more of a sense of is, what does it mean to be within my feminine energy? Because so one of the things, you were talking about ebbs and flows of energy, is we sound like we must be very similar ages, because I'm a 1978 baby. And
me too.
Hey,
yep. Good year.
Well, we're almost exactly similar age, because you just said your birthday is January and mine is March, so we're very similar. Anyway, for various reasons, and I've been exploring these reasons and gaining understanding, but the narrative of my life is that I'm an extrovert. And when I was in my early 20s, I did the Myers-Briggs testing, and that pulled me out as a huge extrovert. And then I did it again a few years later, within a marriage context, and again it pulled me out as a huge extrovert. But in the last few months, I have been starting to think, I think I'm an introvert. And I've just been starting to notice it. And what's been very interesting is that as I have allowed myself to kind of begin to flow more in my feminine energy and understand more about that, I've learned that I need way more rest than I've ever given myself before. I've been able to see what happens when I don't get that rest, what happens when I push from a place of like doing rather than coming from that place of being and the energy flowing forwards. And I just recently went to London. I was doing receiving some training on healing the effects of trauma, which is the one-to-one work that I do. And a woman there happened to be hugely passionate about Myers-Briggs. And I felt this immediate resistance, because I had only ever experienced Myers-Briggs, what I know now, within the context of masculine energy, with the context of how to do more, how to do better, how to get other people to do more and do better. And this woman, who I just met the other week, she embraces it from a place of feminine energy. And so for her, it was all about, what does it mean to be me? What are my preferences for how I like to be in the world? And as we talked, and she just asked me some really simple questions, I just said to her, I said, I'm an introvert. And she said, I thought maybe you were. And it's just been this, in terms of when I think about my SHEro's journey, I mean, this is a flipping huge revelation and realization. And now where I'm at on that SHEro's journey is looking at, what does it mean now to take down all of the scaffolding of being an extrovert that was trying to hold me in this energy that wasn't truly me, and undo all those parts of my story that weren't like authentic, but I tried to be authentic within them. And then what does it now look like to me to honor that, you know, I am an introvert. I need huge amounts of time by myself in order to bring the best of me to the world. And when you were talking just now about SHEro Super Powers and your SHEro's journey, like, I realized that for me, you know, that whole journey that I'm on at the moment around, you know, 40 years almost of extrovert narrative, and now kind of like, oh, wow, like, actually, no, I'm an introvert. And just seeing where, you know, where my preferences lie and where my energy likes to flow. So it was really helpful for me starting to see that as part of this SHEro's journey. And then the other thing as well for me personally, and I'm sharing these stories because I'm hoping that other women who are listening to this, whether they're in my subscription group or they're just somewhere in the world, I'm sharing these stories because I hope that it will help them to connect dots for themselves in terms of this. Is that with my own kind of menstrual cycle, which I talk about, I call it my moon time, or when I come on flow, I've realized through paying attention as a result of your group that I ovulate around the new moon, and I begin my flow just before or on the full moon. And I've been looking into that a bit because I know that often, certainly with younger women who are still in kind of the procreational stage of life, they often ovulate at the full moon, and then come onto their flow around the new moon. So I've been like just noticing how that energy affects me, and just looking up at the sky and seeing the moon, and just noticing more. So can you share with us a little bit? I mean, not too much, partly because of time and partly because you're going to be in a group and I don't want you to give it all away now. But can you share with us a little bit more about these energies of the moon, and how the energies of the moon kind of fits in with these SHEro superpowers and our SHEro's journey, and for those of us that do have an internal moon cycle, kind of how this starts to come together? I mean, I realize you could probably talk about that over the course of like 10 interviews, but in terms of just giving an overview, I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, to try and chunk it down. Something I just want to backtrack to for a moment. Like you said, you felt like you were an extrovert, now you're an introvert. That's absolutely the SHEro's journey. I said we go through it in moments in our life, but actually we go through our entire life is the SHEro's journey. So we start out as like that teenager, and we're like blossoming and we're coming into our energy, and then towards the end of our life we would come into what I would call like the wise woman archetype, and then that's when we're in our most introverted energy. So yeah, even in our life we ebb and flow. So of course we change. We are part of nature. I live in a house with walls and windows and heating, yay for living in the UK, and I drive a car and I love flying, and I wouldn't give up any of that for anything. I love living in the modern world. I love the fact that we can connect by technology. However, living the way that we do, it disconnects us from the fact that we are part of nature. If you look to the cycles, if you look to the world around us, those patterns in nature absolutely happen within us. We have seasons, a child grows, it's a teenager, it blossoms into an adult, and then it wanes, and then we go back to the earth. Just the same way an acorn would grow into the oak, it would, fruit and flower, and then eventually a couple of thousand years later, it would go back to the earth. It's everything that we see in us as humans, we see in nature. So the reason I love working with the moon so much is it's something really easy to connect to. It's something that reminds us that we're changeable. And in a world where we value, again, things that we can control, it's really easy to forget how valuable it is to change, how women change. We can't be controlled. We do have that wild woman. You talked about, embodying your feminine energy, and people often think like feminine is like, oh yes, it's very flowy and gentle, and it's not. It's fierce, it's ferocious, it's compassionate, and it's lovable. Yeah. But look at Mother Nature. Absolutely, she can be calm and tranquil, but she can destroy cities and she can explode volcanoes. There's nothing gentle and serene about the feminine energy. So again, it's that ebb and flow of being fierce and of surrendering and being more compassionate and loving. And there's a time for both. So anyway, you said about the different moon cycles, like feminine moon time cycles. But if we just go for a more traditional bleeding with the new moon, okay, and I'll talk about how those fit in with the SHEro's journeys. And I could talk for ages about how we try and link them up, but for now, let's just go for overview. So yes, remind me if I go off track. So we have the new moon when it's at its darkest. Okay, that relates to winter, and it often relates to our menstrual cycle. But also when we have that kind of that darkness, when we can retreat within, our superpowers are intuitive insight. It's a time to dream. It's a time to reconnect to what we really want in life. It's a time for stillness, and it's a time to nourish our physical bodies. Okay, so we come out of that energy, and the energy around us, the moon energy, is starting to grow. Yeah, it's starting to increase, and we move into like spring. The energy is of spring. So if you think like lightness and growth and energy and excitement and anticipation, that's the energy we move into from there. And the superpowers for the SHEro at that time is like courage and motivation. You feel amazing. You have like this burst of energy, you can go off and you can conquer the world. Yeah, and you're like, yes, that dream I had during the new moon, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna conquer the world, let's go. And then we move into the full moon. Now the full moon can sometimes be too much for people. It's like the peak energy. I was born under a full moon, and for me sometimes the energy it feels like it's amplified, but actually that's when we are thankful. That's when we show gratitude for everything. It's a really good time to have a party because the energy is peaking.
Can I just butt in on this? Because one of the patterns that I have noticed in my subscription, I mean, my subscription group is extraordinary. The women in that group know that it's their village. They, you know, they share the highs and the lows. But when the full moon comes around, that is when essentially the shit hits the fan. Like, that is when there is a flurry of posts about, I can't do this, everything's too much, all coming. So, and I just was reminded, I have noticed that pattern. And then you talked about how the full moon can feel too much. Just in this moment, before you then carry on, or if you want to save it until afterwards, it's up to you. Would you just share one or two tips for those women who do have that full moon experience of, it is too much? And I don't mind if you do that now, or if you wait until...
No, absolutely. We all had the phrase lunatic, and it is literally because the moon's energy is at its peak. It's shining a light on everything. And just as an aside, antisocial behaviour peaks during a full moon, so much so that Brighton and Hove Police Force managed they did a huge workshop at an antisocial behavioural national event where they talked about how they get more police officers on the ground during a full moon because they know they're going to have more trouble.
Wow.
Okay, so you know it's a real phenomenon. My sister's a nurse, and they have more patients come in at a full moon. More babies are born during a full moon. It's like if you work in those kind of areas of society, you pay attention. Children play up at the new moon. They're naughtiest. They sleep less. So one of the ways that just to easily deal with it is just to be aware of it. So that when you feel your energy rising and you're starting to get antsy and mad at people, you can just take a moment to go, is this true? And will it be in a few days' time? You know, what is it that I need to do to support myself right now? Do I remove myself from the situation? Do I say, that the moon's coming up, this is how I have been feeling for the last 3 times. What do I need to do to get myself in a position where I'm supported? Do I need to just remove myself from the situation, go and read a good book, go and have a bath, take myself out with my girlfriends and leave someone else with the children or with my partner, you know, whatever. But for me, it's about awareness. I mean, I showed you before, I do something called moon charting. And it's just like, I can look back and I can identify my patterns. So I'm like, okay, I feel like snapping at my partner right now. And I'm like, oh, it's that time of my cycle. So I'm just going to hold back for a moment because there's no point creating an argument when this is potentially all me projecting. A couple of days later, I think about it and I'm like, oh, I'm glad I didn't, because it's not there anymore. It was just my own heightened internal. So yeah, it's quite good for the relationship too. Because instead of being like, oh my God, I know that actually that was more me. And, you know, he was just chewing his food loudly or something, you know, something that doesn't matter in a couple of days' time, but it was just enough to tip me over the edge, you know. I think we've all had those moments, haven't we? It's like, oh my God, there's a sock on the floor, I'm going to cry. Really, the sock isn't worth crying about, but in that moment, it just feels like too much. So it's really about, I mean, I go into rituals, and we'll share this in your group, you know, rituals. I talk about the moon charting. I've got meditations to share with people, like energy clearing meditations that just take the edge off it. But really, to start with, it's about being aware and just noticing these patterns so that you can get the support that you need. And sometimes that support is just knowing and just taking yourself off for half an hour and knowing that as with the journey, you come out the other side. It's not there forever. It's just a moment in time, and it will pass. The energy does go back down. So, you know, but during that full moon, it's like, how can you channel it? Because the superpowers are like they are, they're powerful, they're confident. It's like, how can you channel that energy to make change? The full moon is literally shining a light. If something's pissing you off, the chances are that it's there because it needs you to notice and it wants your attention. So what needs changing?
Brilliant.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So I did interrupt you though. You were talking through from the new moon round and I interrupted you at the full moon part. So I want to give you space to finish.
Yes. So
about the cycle.
The full moon, then we've had our moment in the spotlight, and now the energy starts to go down. It starts to wane. It's that sigh of relief. But actually, what comes with that is the new moon. We release now between the new moon and the full moon that we've just had back to the new moon. We're in this energy of releasing those things that no longer serve us. And what comes with that are the typical symptoms of PMT, of being really annoyed at everything. That is no longer in alignment with us. So from the full moon down to when we go back to the new moon, or from when we ovulate to when we have our period, it's about noticing sorry, all those things that no longer serve us. So I'm going to start choking. So our superpowers now are releasing the past, releasing those things that no longer serve us. So that can often show up as PMT. And we're like, oh my goodness, I just need to hunker down. But it's like, what's being shown to you? What are you ready to let go of? Again, is it relationships? Is it old patterns? Is it clutter? There's a real desire to get things tidy, to clear away the messes. It might be your desk. You walk in and suddenly you're like, oh my God, there's paper everywhere. I just need to clear it. And it's that energy of clearing the clutter and detoxing and removing those things that no longer serve us. So again, when you have those feelings of PMT, when you feel like being really antsy, just ask what's asking to be cleared out, because this is the energy we're moving into. And then when we have the new moon again, or when you have your physical period, your body is physically releasing. It's making space. Excuse me, it's making space to call in the new, to create the next thing, to go on your next cycle of your SHEro's journey.
Okay, wow. I'm very, very excited about you coming into the group next week. So we have gone over the normal length of the interview, but I do no, you don't need to apologise. That's fine. I think people are still going to watch it because it's just amazing. I do have one more question. If you are happy for me to ask it in terms of time, are you all right for time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So my question is inspired by one of my very, very dear friend's husband, who he says, well, look, how can these phases of the moon make any difference? The moon is there all the time. It just so happens that we see it differently because the sun is shining on it. He's like, I can't see how this can have an effect. Now, that doesn't faze me at all because I have very personal knowledge and experience of this, of the moon's impact. And when you were talking about the full moon and the police in, Brighton, and your friend who's a nurse, and it reminded me that I had a very dear friend at school who went on to study to be a doctor. And when she was doing one of her placements, she was in a psychiatric ward. And on the psychiatric ward, they kept an eye on what was happening in the moon. Apologies if my dog's barking is coming through. They kept an eye on the cycles of the moon because all of the psychiatric patients, their symptoms would escalate at the full moon. So, it seems really clear that this is a true and real phenomenon. But do you know why it is that, despite the fact that the moon is there all the time, the impact of the way the sun shines on it and what we can see causes this flow in energy? You're muted. You're currently muted. There you go.
I said it's interesting, isn't it? Because nobody would question the sun because we can feel the sun. If the sun shut off immediately, the earth would no longer exist. But because the moon is more subtle, it's like the masculine and the feminine energy. It's like that whole power. I can see it, I believe it, it's worthy, it has value. But when we talk about the slightly less tangible things like our intuition, things like understanding the ebbs and flows of understanding the meaning of rest, it's suddenly like, oh, but we have to prove it like scientifically. But yet it's asking us to experience her. It's asking us to notice how we connect to the rhythms of nature, and how those rhythms of nature reflect our own internal rhythms, and how we can use that. So for me, the moon is more like a calendar. It's more like a something that we connect in with. So if I'm out of an evening and I just look up to the sky, or at the moment, if I look up to the morning sky, you can quite often see the moon at the moment, and it's just that moment to pause. It's that moment just to take that pause and just ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? How am I connected to the rhythm of change? Where am I in my own personal cycle? Where are we in the seasonal cycles? In the UK at the moment, we look around, everything's orange and brown and red and golden, and it's falling. And it's like, what do I need to let go of? Where in my life do I need to surrender? Where am I hunkering down for the winter? It's okay that your energy feels like it's dropping, because that's what we do this time of year, and that's what the moon always reminds us of. Yeah. So the sun is that big, forceful, powerful energy. It knows that we can't get away from the fact it's there. However, the moon is that subtle, it's the nuanced energy, and it's absolutely asking us to experience ourselves and experience how we relate to the wider parts of nature. We stand in the sun too long, we get sunburnt. The moon doesn't have that kind of energy. She'll just guide us. We can use her to guide us through our own SHEro's journey, through the month, through the year, through whatever we need. But for me, it's that source of connection.
Wonderful. That is a perfect place to stop. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
It's been amazing. And really looking forward to having you in the group.
Thank you. I can't wait.